Hello, Jays Nation. Welcome back to your YouTube channel, the Toronto Blue Jays News Network. The Toronto Blue Jays have made a new decision on viral pitching prospect TJ Brock, and the timing is raising questions. Just before their crucial series against the Kansas City Royals, Brock has been placed on the 7-day injured list after recently returning from Tommy John surgery. With another Rule 5 draft approaching, this latest setback could have major implications for his future in Toronto. Before starting the video, if you are a true Blue Jays fan, then don't miss this video and don't forget to subscribe our channel and like the video. The Toronto Blue Jays are entering another important stretch of the season. And while most of the attention is focused on the Major League club's playoff push, a significant development has emerged from the organization's minor league system. Right-handed pitcher TJ Brock has been placed on the 7-day injured list by the New Hampshire Fisher Cats, Toronto's Double-A affiliate. The move comes at a frustrating time for Brock. After spending a season and a half away from Double-A baseball while recovering from Tommy John surgery, he had finally returned to the Fisher Cats and was attempting to rebuild his career. Now that comeback has been interrupted again. There is currently no specific diagnosis attached to the injured list transaction, so it would be premature to assume exactly how serious the latest issue is. But because of Brock's injury history, the move immediately raises questions about his health, his development, and perhaps most importantly, his future with the Blue Jays. And this is where the story becomes especially interesting. Brock is not simply another minor league pitcher. Over the past year, his name has become surprisingly recognizable outside baseball circles because of his reported connections to the late Chicago rapper King Von and the broader hip-hop world. That attention made Brock something of an internet phenomenon. But behind the viral clips and social media discussions is a professional baseball player who has been trying to overcome one major obstacle after another. His baseball career has been defined by flashes of potential, serious injuries, and long stretches away from competitive pitching. Now, with another Rule 5 draft approaching, Brock could be entering one of the most important periods of his professional career. So let's take a closer look at what happened, why the Blue Jays' latest decision matters, and what could happen next for TJ Brock. The first thing to understand is that Brock's baseball career has never been a straightforward journey. He has shown enough talent to remain on Toronto's radar, but he has struggled to put together the consistent, healthy innings that every organization wants from a developing pitcher. His career minor league numbers show why the Blue Jays have continued to give him opportunities. Brock has gone 8-1 with a 4.61 ERA, 14 saves, and 140 strikeouts over 84 innings. Those numbers reveal something important. Brock has demonstrated the ability to miss bats. A pitcher recording 140 strikeouts in 84 innings clearly has a skill that organizations notice. The problem has been availability. A pitcher cannot develop if he is constantly forced to stop and start. Every injury interrupts the process. Every lost season means fewer innings. And every missed opportunity makes it harder to determine what that pitcher can become at the highest level. That has been Brock's biggest challenge. In 2024, elbow problems limited him to roughly 11 innings. That was a very small workload, but Brock still showed enough ability when he was on the mound to receive an opportunity in the Arizona Fall League later that year. He pitched for Scottsdale and was recognized as a rising star. For Brock, that was a positive sign. Despite the limited regular season workload, he had still managed to attract attention from evaluators. It suggested that his arm talent remained interesting. But then came the biggest setback of his career. Brock underwent Tommy John surgery in early 2025. The procedure wiped out his entire season. For a professional pitcher, losing an entire year can be devastating. And Tommy John surgery is not simply a short-term injury that can be overcome with a few weeks of rest. The rehabilitation process requires patience. A pitcher has to gradually rebuild strength and work his way back into throwing. Then comes the process of facing hitters again. Velocity has to return. Command has to return. Pitching mechanics have to become comfortable again. And perhaps most importantly, the pitcher needs to prove that his arm can tolerate the workload. For Brock, that process took a long time. Instead of spending 2025 climbing the organizational ladder, he spent the season working his way back. That meant another year without meaningful development on the mound. Then, in 2026, the comeback finally began to take shape. Brock started working through rehabilitation assignments. He appeared in the Florida Complex League. He also pitched at Dunedin. Those assignments were important because they allowed the Blue Jays to gradually increase his workload while keeping him within a controlled environment. Eventually, Brock was ready for a bigger challenge. He returned to Double-A baseball with New Hampshire. That was a major milestone. Double-A represents a significantly more advanced level of professional baseball. Hitters are stronger. The competition is tougher. The margin for error becomes smaller. For a pitcher coming back from Tommy John surgery, reaching Double-A is evidence that the organization believes he is ready for a more serious test. But Brock's 2026 numbers have not been ideal. He recorded an 8.22 ERA across 7 2/3 innings in 8 outings. At first glance, that is obviously concerning. An 8.22 ERA is not the type of performance a pitcher wants attached to his name. But there is important context. 7 2/3 innings is an extremely small sample, and Brock was still in the process of rebuilding his arm after a major surgery. It would be unfair to look at those numbers and conclude that Brock simply cannot pitch anymore. At the same time, the Blue Jays cannot completely ignore the results. Every inning matters when an organization is deciding which players deserve future opportunities. That is why the latest injured list transaction is frustrating. Brock needed innings. He needed appearances. He needed the opportunity to prove that the pitcher who produced those impressive strikeout totals earlier in his career was still there. Instead, his comeback has been interrupted once again. The New Hampshire Fisher Cats placed him on the 7-day injured list Monday. At this point, there is no specific diagnosis attached to the transaction. That means there is still a lot we don't know. It could be a minor issue. It could be something related to workload management. It could be something more significant. Without additional information, nobody should assume the worst. But given Brock's history, it is understandable why the move has attracted attention. The Blue Jays have already watched him miss substantial time because of elbow problems. They watched him undergo Tommy John surgery. They watched him spend all of 2025 rehabbing. They watched him finally return to competitive baseball. And now he is back on the injured list. That creates uncertainty. But while Brock's health is the biggest baseball story, there is another reason his name has become so recognizable: his viral internet status. Last October, social media users began circulating clips and photos that allegedly connected Brock to the late Chicago rapper King Von. The story quickly spread beyond baseball communities. People who had never heard of Brock as a pitcher suddenly knew his name because of the online discussion surrounding those connections. The Source magazine later published a feature about the unusual crossover. According to that reporting, Brock appeared in material associated with King Von, including music videos and performances. The reporting also discussed social media interactions involving Brock and King Von before the rapper's death in 2020. As those images and clips circulated, Brock became a viral topic. The nickname O Block Brock began appearing online. And suddenly, a minor league baseball pitcher was being discussed on social media platforms far removed from the baseball world. The story also connected Brock through reported relationships or appearances to other figures in hip-hop. That included names such as Kodak Black, Pooh Shiesty, Lil Durk, Moneybagg Yo, and Black Youngsta. But this is an important point. Internet discussions can move extremely quickly. A photograph, a short video, or an association can be interpreted in many different ways. Once a story becomes viral, people often repeat claims without checking the original context. So it is important to distinguish between what has been publicly reported and what is merely speculation or social media commentary. Brock himself eventually addressed the attention. During his rehabilitation assignment with the Dunedin Blue Jays in July, he spoke about his unexpected online fame. His explanation was relatively simple. He described himself as an outgoing person who enjoys both baseball and rap music. According to Brock, the relationships developed naturally through his interests and personality. That provides a different perspective from the one created by social media. And it also reminds us that viral fame doesn't necessarily tell us anything about a player's baseball ability. For the Blue Jays, the question isn't whether Brock is popular online. The question is whether he can become a productive professional pitcher. That is what will determine his future. And right now, that future is uncertain. One reason is his age. Brock is 27 years old. At 27, a player is generally expected to be much closer to establishing a professional role than a young prospect who still has several years of development ahead of him. That doesn't mean Brock is too old to make it. Far from it. Pitchers can develop at different speeds. Some players reach the majors later than expected, and relief pitchers in particular can sometimes emerge suddenly after years in the minor leagues. But age does change the evaluation. The Blue Jays have to consider how much development time remains. They also have to consider the amount of roster space available. And that brings us to the Rule 5 draft. Brock was left unprotected by Toronto for last December's Rule 5 draft. He had become eligible after 4 professional seasons. The Blue Jays had decisions to make about which players they wanted to protect on their 40-man roster. Toronto chose to protect players including Ricky Tiedemann and Brandon Valenzuela. Brock was not among those protected. That meant another team could have selected him, but no team did. For Toronto, that was important. It allowed the organization to keep Brock without having to use a 40-man roster spot. But the situation may return this winter. Brock is expected to be Rule 5 eligible again, and that could make the next few months very important. If Brock returns from the injured list and pitches effectively, he could potentially strengthen his case for protection. If he struggles or remains injured, his situation becomes more difficult. A team considering selecting a player in the Rule 5 draft has to believe that player can contribute at the major league level. That makes injured players particularly complicated. Another organization would have to decide whether Brock's potential and strikeout ability are worth the risk. And Toronto would have to decide whether it wants to protect him. This is where his health becomes even more important. A healthy Brock with strong results would be a much different Rule 5 candidate than a pitcher who has barely been able to pitch over the past 2 seasons. That is why every appearance between now and the winter matters. Unfortunately, the latest injury means Brock may lose valuable opportunities to make that case. Still, it is important not to overreact. The 7-day injured list is not automatically a sign that a season is over. It does not mean Tommy John surgery has failed. It does not mean Brock's Blue Jays career is finished. And it does not mean the organization has lost confidence in him. The transaction simply means he is temporarily unavailable. The real story will become clearer once more information about the injury becomes available and once Brock returns to the mound. If he comes back quickly, the latest setback could eventually become nothing more than a minor interruption. If he misses an extended period, however, the concern will grow. And that would make his Rule 5 situation even more interesting. The Blue Jays have to balance potential against reliability. Brock has potential. His strikeout numbers prove that, but reliability has been difficult to establish. This is the challenge facing Toronto. Organizations are constantly forced to make decisions about players who have talent but have struggled with injuries. There is no perfect formula. Protecting Brock could mean using a valuable 40-man roster spot on a pitcher who still has significant uncertainty surrounding him. Leaving him unprotected could mean losing him to another organization. And that other organization could potentially unlock something the Blue Jays haven't been able to see yet. That's the risk. The Blue Jays have to decide whether Brock's upside is worth protecting. And Brock has to give them evidence that the upside is still there. The good news is that his career has already provided evidence of ability. His 140 strikeouts over 84 minor league innings are not meaningless. His 14 saves show that he has been trusted in different roles. His 8-1 career record also demonstrates that he has experienced success. And his Arizona Fall League recognition shows that he has previously attracted attention from evaluators. So this isn't a situation where Toronto is protecting a player based purely on potential. There is a track record. The problem is that the track record has been interrupted. That is why his comeback is so important. If Brock can return to the mound, regain his command, and start missing bats again, his career could change quickly. Pitchers can move rapidly through organizational depth when they are healthy and effective. A strong stretch at Double-A could put him back on the radar. And if he continues to progress, the Blue Jays could eventually view him as a potential bullpen option. His strikeout ability would make that especially interesting. Relief pitchers don't always need to throw a huge number of innings. What they need to do is get outs. If Brock can demonstrate that he can consistently attack hitters and miss bats, there could be a role for him. But first, he has to stay on the mound. That is the biggest challenge. And this is where his story connects back to the Blue Jays' major league situation. Toronto is fighting for a playoff position. The club is just 1.5 games behind the final American League wild card spot. That is a very small gap. The Blue Jays recently won 7 of 10 games and appeared to be building momentum. Then came the Yankees series. Toronto lost the 3-game series in New York and finished it with an 8-3 loss on Sunday. Now the team returns home to face Kansas City. For the Major League roster, the focus is obviously on winning. But the organization also needs to think beyond the current season. A playoff contender needs organizational depth. It needs pitchers who can eventually help at the Major League level. It needs players who can step in when injuries occur. And it needs to develop talent efficiently. That is why players like Brock remain important even if they aren't currently on the Major League roster. A player who looks like a long shot one year can become an important depth option the next. But the opposite can also happen. A player can run out of opportunities if injuries continue to prevent development. Brock is somewhere in the middle. He has enough talent to remain interesting, but he needs health and performance to turn that talent into a sustainable career. And that makes this latest injured list move particularly frustrating. The timing could not be much worse. Brock had finally made it back to Double-A. He had finally returned to the level where the organization could get a better evaluation of his progress. And now he has to pause again. The next step will be rehabilitation. Then comes another return to throwing, then more innings. And eventually, the Blue Jays will have to evaluate whether he is ready to continue his climb. That process could take time. But patience is often necessary with pitchers returning from Tommy John surgery. The priority should be getting Brock healthy rather than rushing him back simply because the Rule 5 draft is approaching. At the same time, Brock knows that the calendar matters. The organization has limited roster space. The Rule 5 draft is coming. And there are always younger players moving through the system. Every player is competing for opportunities. That is the reality of professional baseball. There are no guarantees. And Brock's story is a perfect example. He has already overcome a major surgery. He has already spent significant time away from baseball. He has already returned to the mound. Now he has another obstacle. But this latest setback does not erase everything he has accomplished. It also doesn't erase his potential. The Blue Jays still have time to evaluate him. The most important thing will be what happens when he returns. Does his velocity look good? Does his command improve? Does his breaking stuff generate swings and misses? Can he handle a larger workload? Can he string together appearances without another interruption? Those are the questions scouts and coaches will be watching. The answers will likely determine how Toronto approaches his future. And then there is the possibility that another organization could become interested. That's where the Rule 5 draft creates another layer of drama. Imagine Brock returns late in the season and suddenly looks like the pitcher Toronto hoped he could become. His strikeout numbers start climbing. His ERA improves. His arm looks healthy. Suddenly, leaving him unprotected becomes much more dangerous. Another organization could look at the talent and decide that Brock is worth the risk. But if he remains limited to a handful of innings, the situation could be completely different. That is why the next few months matter so much. Brock is essentially trying to change the narrative surrounding his career. Right now, the narrative is built around potential and injuries. The goal is to change that to potential and performance. And the only way to do that is by pitching. This is also why the viral story should not overshadow the baseball story. The internet may remember Brock because of his association with the music world. But if he eventually reaches the major leagues, that will become the real achievement. The goal of every minor league player is to reach the highest level. Brock has not done that yet. His career has been delayed, but it isn't over. There is still a path, and that path begins with health. The Blue Jays will have to monitor him carefully. They will have to decide how aggressively to build his workload. They will have to evaluate his performance against increasingly difficult competition. And eventually, they will have to make the roster decision. For Brock, the message is simple. Stay healthy, pitch well, make the organization believe. That's easier said than done, but the opportunity remains. And that is what makes this story worth following. The Toronto Blue Jays have bigger immediate concerns. Their major league team is chasing a playoff spot. The Royal Series is important. The wild card race is tight. But organizations are built over multiple seasons. And players like TJ Brock represent part of the organization's long-term depth. If he can get healthy and rediscover his previous form, he could still become a useful piece. If he cannot, the Blue Jays may eventually have to move on. That is the harsh reality of professional sports. Talent matters. Potential matters. But availability matters too. And for Brock, availability has been the biggest problem. The latest 7-day injured list placement is therefore not necessarily a final verdict. It is another checkpoint, another moment in a long comeback, another test. The baseball world will now wait to see what comes next. Will Brock return quickly? Will he get another opportunity at Double-A? Can he improve on the 8.22 ERA he posted in his limited 2026 action? Can he rebuild his workload? Can he finally stay healthy? And perhaps the biggest question of all, will the Blue Jays decide that he is worth protecting before the next Rule 5 draft? Those answers are still ahead. For now, the Blue Jays have placed Brock on the 7-day injured list, and no specific diagnosis has been announced. That is all we know for certain from the transaction. Everything beyond that needs to be treated carefully. There is no reason to assume the worst until more information becomes available. But there is also no denying that the situation deserves attention. Brock's career has already taken several unexpected turns. He has gone from promising minor league pitcher to injured player, from Tommy John surgery to a long rehabilitation, from the Florida Complex League to Dunedin, from Dundon back to Double-A, and from a relatively unknown minor league pitcher to a viral internet personality. Now he is facing another challenge. And perhaps this one could be one of the most important, because the next few months could determine whether TJ Brock remains a Blue Jays prospect heading into the future, or becomes another player whose career was ultimately limited by injuries. The good news is that the story is not finished. At 27, Brock still has an opportunity. He has experience. He has strikeout ability. He has already shown that he can compete professionally. And most importantly, he has already shown the determination required to make it back from Tommy John surgery. Now he needs to do it again after this latest setback. For Toronto, the decision will come down to risk versus reward. Do they believe the pitcher they saw before his injuries can return? Do they believe his strikeout ability can translate into a useful major league role? Do they believe he can stay healthy? And is that upside enough to justify protecting him on the 40-man roster? Those are questions that will become increasingly important as the offseason approaches. But before any of that happens, Brock needs to get back on the mound. And while his latest injured list placement may be disappointing, it does not automatically end his season or his career. The next update will tell us much more. For now, the Blue Jays continue their playoff push at the major league level while Brock continues his own fight to stay in the organization's plans. The two stories are happening at the same time. Toronto is chasing October. Brock is chasing a healthy return. And both stories are worth watching. Because if the Blue Jays can keep their major league momentum alive and players like Brock can finally overcome their injury problems, Toronto could have more depth than it appears to have right now. But baseball doesn't operate on potential alone. Eventually, players have to perform. And for TJ Brock, the next performance will have to wait until he is healthy enough to return. Until then, the 7-day injured list is simply the latest chapter in a career that has already been filled with unexpected twists. The viral attention may have introduced TJ Brock to the internet, Tommy John surgery may have taken him away from baseball for more than a year. His return to Double-A gave him another opportunity. And now, this latest injury has temporarily stopped him again. But the story isn't over. The Blue Jays still have a decision to make. Brock still has something to prove. And with another Rule 5 draft approaching, the next few months could be critical. For a player who has already spent so much time fighting to get back onto the mound, the objective is now very clear. Get healthy, get back to pitching, and show the Blue Jays that there is still a future for TJ Brock in Toronto.